and we'll let some people join us.
Okay.
Yeah, so I decided to pose the question this week. If you could cast a mild annoyance curse, what would you do? Because lately I've loved this kind of question. Someone asked it in a group. They said, if you could own a store and only sell like inconvenient things, what would you do? And an example was sell things that require batteries, but no batteries, or sell things that were all missing one piece kind of thing. So I thought this mild annoyance curse thing would be pretty funny to see what people might have to share.
That is funny. Yes.
Did you post the link?
It should be up. I didn't send it directly to you, but I will right now so you can share it.
Okay.
One of my favorite things about this program is it auto-generates subtitles. Okay. Here is the link for you.
Thank you.
And I meant to tell you I have a huge box of books to bring you to sign, but I wanted to make sure that it was at a time where you were interested in, although I don't know if I can, but we'll talk about that later. I won't talk about that now.
Okay.
I realize there's some things that might impede that, so we will talk about that. So we can get some signatures. I have I just got I think I got 10 copies. I now have 10 copies of each of the magical animal rescue books on hand, and then I have more. I had to fill in More Than a Princess. I always have to make sure I remember which one came first. I have plenty of the second, and I had to refill the first. So if anyone is looking for those, I do have those. You can also order them while we're waiting for a few people to jump on at www.capricosbooks.com.
Sounds good.
All right, let's see who we got today. I heard it's very hot outside, so hopefully we'll get some viewers because they don't want to go outside, at least here in Maryland. Yesterday I was in my car and the thermometer said 109.
That's horrible.
And I said, it is June.
Yeah.
It is before mid-June even.
Just imagine what August is going to be like.
Oh, I don't want to.
Yeah. You ready for me?
All right. You are, yeah, let's add you on here. We've got some viewers now. If you are joining us now, go ahead and leave a comment in the comment box. You can say anything, but my question of the week is for you is, if you could cast a mild annoyance curse, what would you do? Some examples of a mild annoyance curse are someone couldn't say the word the, or maybe they always lost their left shoe, or lost their keys, or the key wouldn't fit the first time. So leave us a comment so that we know you're here and watching. And without further ado, I will introduce here our lovely faces. Hello! So I am Liz from Capricos Books, and we all know the wonderful author, Miss Edie Baker.
Hi, everybody.
So I will not take up the early part with chit-chat. I will let you go ahead and get started. And this week we are reading... Oh, I did it wrong. I have to change that. I'll change it and then I'll add it. But you can go ahead and get started.
Okay. We're reading Once Upon a Curse. This is the older cover. And if you have the newer one, this is the cover.
See, I have not seen that one yet. That's the only book I have not seen that cover yet. I only have seen the old cover. So I've not come across the new cover yet.
Okay. And just to show you ahead of time, these are the foreign editions. This one is, I believe, Korean.
Oh, that's gorgeous.
Cover.
Yeah, very similar.
Yeah, and I think this was from Brazil. Jose Olympia does Hispanic, or it might be, this is Portugal.
Ooh.
Portuguese.
Oh, that's interesting. It's a much different color, all like a brighter orange and
Yeah.
like no castle and
Yeah. Oh, and I do have to mention that the castle on this was done by my oldest daughter, who is an
oh,
artist, and she did that when she was in college.
fantastic. That's so great.
Yeah. All right. Once Upon a Curse. Chapter 1. When I was a little girl, I never gave much thought to doing magic. I'd watch my Aunt Grisina perform it every day, and she never seemed to have any problems. When I started practicing magic, I expected it to be as easy for me as it had been for her. I couldn't have been more wrong. My first attempts at magic were a series of small disasters. I made crabapple tarts that grew claws and pinched us. My cleaning spells were so strong that my bed made itself, even when I was in it, and a whirlwind swept up everything I dropped, including my shoes and hair ribbons, dumping them in the dung heap behind the stables. I became a frog because of one kind of magic, while another kind turned me back into a frog at the worst possible times. Sometimes my magic didn't do what I'd intended, sending me to the dungeon or making me prematurely old. When dragon steam enhanced my magic and I became a powerful witch, I thought that my problems with magic were over. But once again, I was wrong. Suddenly, I had bigger problems to face, problems caused by magic that I soon learned only magic could fix. I'd been visiting my Aunt Christina's workshop in the dungeon every day for the last few weeks, and I'd almost finished studying her parchments and the books she'd brought down from the tower rooms. With only a few more left to check, I was getting increasingly frustrated since I hadn't found a single spell that would help me. When I'd arrived in the dungeon that morning, Christina had dashed out of her room without saying where she was headed. Knowing her, she probably had some sort of mischief planned. I would have followed her to see what she was up to if I hadn't had something more important to do. Massaging my forehead with one hand, I pushed the parchment aside with the other. I was tired of sitting in the dungeon. It wasn't as bad as it could have been, since there were plenty of candles, and I dressed warmly. But the candles kept sputtering and going out, and the stink of decay was so strong it made my head hurt. Something ran over my shoe, and I jerked my foot under my chair. It's probably Blister, I thought, shuddering. Once, before she changed from being the kind and gentle Green Witch to being the nasty, bewitched self she'd been for the last year or so, Christina had kept a small, inoffensive, apple-green snake that had never bothered anyone. Now she shared her room with an old gray rat she'd found in the dungeon, Blister. He smelled awful, his fur was patchy, and his naked tail was covered with sores. But his worst feature was his disposition, which was as nasty as my aunt's. I didn't mind the chill of the dungeon, the magic fogs that drifted from room to room, or even the ghosts who popped in unexpectedly. Blister was a different story, however, since he loved tripping me and jumping out of shadows to startle me. For the 100th time, I thought about creating my own witch's light so I wouldn't have to strain to see the words on the pages and the creatures that lurked in the darkened corners of the room. I knew better, however, because this was my aunt's workshop, and she didn't like anyone doing magic in it except her. She was always nasty, but she was even worse if you did something she didn't like, which is why I'd gone to the dungeon in the first place. The feeble light from her flickering candles would have to do. I'd been looking for a cure for the family curse for over a year. My aunt had been its most recent victim, and if I didn't do something about it before my 16th birthday, I might fall prey to it as well. Like our magical abilities, the curse had been passed down from generation to generation. It had started when my long-ago ancestor, Hazel, the first Green Witch, had given out everlasting bouquets at her 16th birthday party and hadn't brought enough for everyone. A disappointed fairy had cursed her, saying that if Hazel ever touched another flower, she'd lose her beauty as well as her sweet disposition. Unfortunately, the spell had ended with Hazel, who had died centuries before I was born. The spell hadn't ended with Hazel, who had died centuries before I was born. Women in my family learned to stay away from flowers with life-altering consequences if they didn't. They not only became ugly to look at, they turned so nasty that hardly anyone could stand them. I finished reading another parchment and sighed. One more collection of useless spells for turning sow's ears into silk purses and lead into gold. The last spell, so long and involved that it almost put me to sleep, had explained how to make mountains out of molehills. "Almost finished, Emma?" said a high-pitched voice. My friend, a bat named Lil, peered at me from the ceiling where she hung upside down. "It shouldn't be long now," I told her. Rolling the parchment into a tube, I set it beside the others that I'd already studied. I was reaching for the last two when I heard scratching at the door. "Gracina's back," I said, pulling my hand away. My magic had improved remarkably since the day I had learned that I had the talent. Not only had I become a dragon friend, I had also become the Green Witch after Gracina lost the title. I could do a lot of things that I would once have considered impossible. Now I knew who was standing on the other side of the door without opening it. This was particularly handy when I was trying to avoid talking to my mother. The scratching came again. Why would Gracina scratch the door? Lil asked. Good question. I reached for the latch and they had opened the heavy wooden door only a few inches when it smacked into me and an enormous lizard bounded across the threshold. At least 7 feet long, the stocky creature's body seemed to fill the room. It raised its head to hiss at Lil, but didn't pay any attention to me. Lil shrieked and flew to the ceiling, tried to hide in the cracks between the stones. The lizard cackled, and its edges grew fuzzy. Then suddenly my aunt was standing in its place. Why are you still here? She asked me. I thought you were almost finished. I would have finished days ago if you had more light. There's enough light in here to do my spells, but if it stops your whining, I'll give you your rotten witch's lights. Anything to get rid of you sooner. With a wave of her hand and a few muffled words, Gracina sent a flurry of small globes bouncing against the ceiling. Instead of the rosy glow her witch's light had made before she changed, these cast a sickly shade of green, making us look mortally ill. A fuzzy little animal with a stubby tail and tiny ears scurried across the table. The creature squeaked as it ran off the edge and fell to the floor, where it lay on its back, twitching. Although it was about the size of a mouse, it didn't look like any I'd ever seen. What is that? I asked my aunt. A hamster, she said. I saw them on my travels once. It used to be a spider, but hamsters have more meat on them. Being a lizard makes you hungry. That's disgusting, I exclaimed. Do you really think so? Gracina asked, her eyes brightening. I looked up when one of the witch's lights went out. An ugly brown fog, smelling of rotting vegetables, was smothering the lights one by one. Gracina darted across the room to a barrel and rolled it to the center of the floor. The fog had almost reached the last witch's light when she muttered a few words, and the barrel began to shake. Hissing like an angry snake, the barrel swelled as it sucked the fog through a small opening inside. When the last wisp had disappeared, Gracina rammed a plug into the hole and rubbed her hands together. Good, she said. I can use more of that. What do you need it for? This, she said, stomping to her workbench and uncovering a bowl filled with lavender dust. I distill the fog and collect the residue. What does it do? I asked. None of your business, she said, slamming the cover back on the bowl. You're too nosy for your own good. I think you'd better leave. I'm sick of seeing your face around here. I'm not finished yet. I have 2 more parchments. Here, take them, she said, snatching the parchments off the table and tossing them to the floor. And don't come back. Lil fluttered from her hiding place in the ceiling while I picked up the parchments. We'd hardly crossed the threshold before the door slammed shut behind us. At least you got the parchment, said Lil, landing on my shoulder. I thought she didn't want them to leave her workshop. That's what she said when I first asked to see them. It's the only reason I didn't take them upstairs before this. Unfortunately, these probably won't be any more helpful than the others. I guess I'm going to have to look somewhere else. Where else can you look? That's a good question, I said. My 16th birthday is next week, and I have to find a counter curse before then. Father has scheduled his tournament to start the day before. He says it's to celebrate my birthday. But I think that's just an excuse. He's invited Gracina's parents and half of their kingdom, so I think he's hoping to impress my potential in-laws before any marriage contract is signed. Lil looked puzzled. Why do you have to find the counter curse before your birthday? Because the curse could change me anytime after I turn 16. If that happens, there won't be a green witch to protect the safety of Greater Greensword. At least Gracina had me to take her place, but I don't know anyone who could take mine. There you are, my mother called as I closed the dungeon door behind me. I can't imagine why you spend so much time in that horrid place, but then you always were peculiar. Hearing my mother's voice, Lil slipped off my shoulder and fluttered toward the darker recesses of the corridor. I couldn't blame her for being afraid of my mother. I was visiting Gracina's workshop, I said, hoping to distract my mother from the fleeing bat. Mother looked as if she'd swallowed something bitter. Since the curse had taken effect, she'd avoided my aunt as much as she did my grandmother. I nodded to my mother's lady-in-waiting, who was hovering close enough to hear her name called, but far enough away to appear discreet. Your Highness, she replied, curtsying lower than she used to before I was a green witch. Being a princess hadn't meant nearly as much as being the most powerful witch in the kingdom, and I now received a lot more respect than I ever had before. Cradling the parchments in my arms, I joined my mother as she entered the great hall. I told you, I said, I'm looking for a cure for the family curse. Gracina's been letting me look through her books and parchments. Have you found anything? Not yet. I'm not surprised. If all the witches before you weren't able to come with a cure, what makes you think you can? Don't get an inflated opinion of yourself, miss, just because you're the green witch. I won't, Mother. I certainly wouldn't with her around. I just think that they might not have looked hard enough or in the right places. More likely there's nothing to find. You're wasting your time when you should be seeing to your new gowns. You'll be meeting Prince Edric's parents next week when they come for the tournament, and I want you looking your best, although there isn't much we can do with someone as tall and gangly as you. The seamstress will need all the time she can get to make you presentable, so I want you to go see her now. What I'm doing is very important. Getting married is very important, and if you don't make a good impression on your future husband's parents, there may not be a wedding. We're going to have to use every trick we can to make them like you, and it's not going to be easy. I still haven't told Edric I'd marry him, but you will soon if you know what's good for you, Mother said, narrowing her eyes. I left my mother with the promise that I would see the seamstress as soon as I could, but I had no intention of going straight there. Fittings were torture as far as I was concerned, because my mother always showed up to point out my physical shortcomings as if I were the work of an inept sculptor. I hadn't told anyone why I'd put off answering Edric. Even he didn't know the real reason, although he'd made me promise to give him my answer at the tournament. I was afraid it wasn't going to be the answer he wanted to hear. Although I knew I loved him, I wasn't sure that I should get married. It was one thing to marry the man you love with the idea of living happily ever after, but it was something entirely different knowing that you could turn nasty any day and abandon your husband and children. I didn't want the same thing to happen to Edric that happened to my grandfather. Left on his own, and my grandmother Olivine had changed from normal to mean. My mother, who had so far avoided the curse by completely banning flowers in the castle, may not have thought it possible to find a way to end the family curse, but I had to believe that such a curse existed. If I was unable to end the curse, I had no intention of marrying anyone. The tower rooms I now used had once been my aunt's, but I'd claimed them when Gracina moved to the dungeon. It was difficult to run up the uneven steps, and I had only reached the first arrow slit when Lil dropped from the ceiling and landed on my shoulder. "What took you so long?" she asked. "I've been waiting here for ages." "I was talking to my mother," I said. "Your mother doesn't like me. She makes people hit me with brooms." "She's afraid of bats. You'll just have to stay away from her. I'd be happy to, but she's hard to avoid. So are her eeks." "What are eeks?" "The people try to bash me. They come running every time she covers her head and shrieks, 'Eek!'" I smiled. "Eek isn't a title or a name. It's sort of like saying, 'Ick, a bug.'" Will snorted. "That's insulting, isn't it?" As if trying to hurt me wasn't enough. The moment we entered my chamber, Lil headed for the storage room where she usually slept, leaving me on my own. I hadn't made many changes to the tower after I moved in, so it looked much the same as it had when my aunt lived there. A new workbench occupied the main room, replacing the one Gracina had taken with her to the dungeon. The 2 chairs and the table still sat before the fireplace. The dappled green rug still covered the floor. Gracina had left her tapestries, a saltwater bowl, and the living crystalline bouquet behind, and I had seen no reason to move them. I was comfortable in the tower and had all the space I needed to do my work as the Green Witch. Along with the title had come the ring on my finger and the responsibility of watching over Greater Greensword. Protecting our beautiful kingdom was a job I enjoyed. I used a far-seeing ball to keep watch over the kingdom and toured the countryside by magic carpet every few weeks. Since becoming the Green Witch, I'd fended off an invasion from a neighboring kingdom, chased away a pack of werewolves, routed a trio of nasty trolls, and taught a flock of harpies not to harass our villagers. I'd also taken on the responsibility of keeping the castle moat clean, which wasn't easy because Gracina insisted on dumping her trash into it. A witch's trash is different from that of an ordinary person, and sometimes noxious fumes and bizarre creatures emerged from the moat. My aunt had been the kindest living being adult I'd ever known, and I'd missed her real nature more than I could say, which was the other reason I had to find a cure for the family curse. Gracina was now as horrible as she had once been wonderful, and her nasty tricks were getting worse every day. She had been terrible to Haywood, the man who had been her betrothed. He had lived with us for nearly 5 months after Gracina had changed, finally moving out when the tricks she played on him began to torment other people as well. He hadn't moved far, however, and still visited the castle now and then. Gracina had driven away my mother's favorite ladies-in-waiting and more servants than we could afford to lose. Lately, my aunt even turned herself into strange beasts like the lizard I'd just run into, terrorizing the people and animals in and around the castle. Turning Gracina back into her old self would make everyone's life more pleasant. I unrolled a parchment and settled down to read, but it proved to be as useless as the others. After glancing at the last parchment, I set them both aside and went to see Lil. She blinked when I opened the door to the storage room. "Find anything?" she asked. "Nothing useful, unless I want to remove rust or turn myself into a bird. I don't want to give up, but I don't know where to look next. I've talked to every bookseller at the Magic Marketplace. I've gone through my grandmother's books and parchments, and now I've looked at all of Racina's, and I haven't found anything I can use. What about Vonneby's cottage? Modine left a lot of good books there. When I was 14, Lil Edric and I had been imprisoned in a witch's cottage deep in the enchanted forest. A previous occupant had left her books of magic spells behind. The spells had been reliable, and I'd used a number of them before I learned how to create my own. Remembering that book, I felt a surge of hope. If the other books were just as helpful, perhaps one of them might contain the information I needed. That's a good idea, I said. If I go now, I can be back before dark. You sent the magic carpet to be mended, remember? Lil said. How are you going to get there? I was about to answer when I glanced out the window. A dove was flying past the tower, the bronze-edged pattern on its wings distinctive in the bright summer sun. I leaned against the windowsill to watch the bird. I wish I could do that, I thought as the dove swooped and turned. I loved trying new spells. Because Edric had been involved in the original spell that had turned me into a frog, every time I had turned into one, he had as well. However, once my power had become strong enough and I was better able to control it, I could turn it into other creatures without changing Edric. I think I'll fly. I climbed onto the window ledge and recited the spell from the parchment. Fleet of wing and sharp of beak, turn me to the shape I seek. When I say the final word, I will be a feathered bird. My magic was stronger now, so the change was swift and painless. I no longer felt queasy when I changed from my human form to that of a creature, although the difference in perspective was still disorienting. I spread my wings and saw that I was covered with pale brown feathers. I turned into a dove, the last kind of bird I'd seen. Cocking my head, I bent down to examine my orange feet tipped with sharp, small talons. I'd watched birds before, of course, so I didn't think that flying could be too hard. After all, it didn't take baby birds long to learn, and I was certainly smarter than a sparrow. Raising my wings, I brought them down in a short, sharp movement. I was thrilled and my feet rose from the ledge, but raising my wings again forced me back down. There must be some trick to this, I thought. Beating my wings once more, I moved out the window and found myself high above the moat. Surprised, I forgot to flap and dropped like a stone. Remembering to flap again when I was only a few feet above the water, a long gray tentacle shot through scum floating on the surface, its leaf-shaped tip brushing my tail. I beat my wings again, zigzagging up and down, trying to stay out of the monster's reach. Christina must have dumped more trash into the moat, but I couldn't do anything about it until I got back. I was over dry land again when I discovered that if I twisted my wings and folded them part way, I wouldn't force myself down each time I raised them, and could finally fly like a real bird. I experimented, soaring higher than the castle tower and swooping low to skim the meadow grass. A sunny day with only a gentle breeze nodding the buttercups that edged the farmer's fields. It was a perfect day to practice flying. That was chapter 1, which was a longer chapter. Chapter 1.
Yeah, I was gonna say that. I was like, wow. I was like, this is a really long first chapter. Not that we mind. I just thought it was interesting considering last week it was a very short first chapter, which is good. That's something that I am always curious about, is how you break chapters up while you're writing and decide this has to be a new one, or if that's something you do or that's something an editor does.
No, that's something I do. It's just where it feels like there's a change. It could be a change in the scene. It could be a change in the tempo of the scene. It just what feels right.
I understand. Sorry.
I also try not to have chapters more than 15 or 16 pages long.
Which makes sense, because I like chapters because they are, as I say, bite-sized little bits where you feel like I'm one of the weirdos who doesn't use bookmarks. I don't fold pages. I don't use bookmarks. I either remember the page number or I try to read chapters. So then that way I just know where I left off. So our friend Addison is here with us. So
hi, Addison.
We're so excited she was able to join us. So our question, which I'll ask Addison and see what she has to say, and I'm curious what you might think. What's a mild annoyance curse that you might put on someone? So my example was maybe not, the person wouldn't be able to use the word the, or they would all lose their left shoe or something like that. What kind of thing would you do?
Are you asking me or you're asking Addison?
Both. Asking both. I know Addison will leave it in the comments if she can think of something. She's probably so sweet. Both of you are so sweet. You probably couldn't think of anything mean.
Well, I thought of one thing. Every
Okay.
time you have something important to say, you get the hiccups and you can't talk.
Yes, that's such a good one. Oh, that would be quite the annoying thing to deal with. For us, I feel like we usually chit chat. So as a joke between us, I feel like we end up yawning.
They do.
We'll keep talking because we don't. I know it's because with quarantine, and I always say this, we're not around a lot of people, so we don't tend to talk that often. And I know for myself, then I start talking a lot, and I get really excited about everything, and then I start yawning because I forget that I need to breathe in between what I'm saying. So. Well, that was nice and short and sweet, and I don't know if Addison has oh, she says whenever someone is mean to me, they have to hop on one foot for 5 minutes. All right, I like that one. That's a good one. Just something, just a little bit, annoying. I like that one. Very good, Addison. So we will wrap it up, and I already have everything ready for next week. I'm really excited for that. How many books total are in this series?
9.
9, okay. And this is technically this is book 3 in the series, but it's actually the 4th story because the salamander spell comes first in the storyline. So that's a good one, Addison. She said that's the best I could come up with. That's pretty good. So we are ready for No More Magic next week, and
No place for magic.
No Place for Magic. I'm sorry.
Right,
No Place for Magic. I knew I was close.
You were very good.
I was just looking at the cover and the flying carpet and thinking of it. So I have another question. When I put it up, I now am trying to add questions to our screen so that when it gets shared, you have the question ahead of time and you can answer it or think about it. But if you are rewatching this later, again, my name is Liz from Capricoast Books, and I am joined by author Edie Baker. I have all of her books at our store, Capricoast Books, and you can find that online at www.capricoastbooks.com, and you can order signed copies, or you can send me an email, and I have signed book plates that you can add to books that you might already have. So just send me an email or any of that, and that's all I've got for today. So thank you again so much for reading, and have a wonderful day, everybody.
Bye, everybody. Stay safe.
See you next week at 3.